Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Aquavide Uskava, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton. Slancha!
And good day, Whiskey brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Whiskey Book Club's third book of Season 5 with Hans Offringa, author of this book right here, Malts and Jazz, a swinging look at single malt whiskey. And as always, I'm honored to have you, the viewer, with us here today. And really, where else could you delve so deeply into the subject of whiskey than with the author right here, right now? My name's Dolph. I'm the Spirit of Edmonton on social media platforms, the founder of the Whiskey Book Club, your host today, not tonight like I usually say. For those new to the Whiskey Book Club, I'll explain a little bit of what it's about. It's a home base. It's a safe place for whiskey geeks that love to share a dram and share a passion for reading, mostly about whiskey-related activities and books. So this book is the 24th book reviewed on the Whiskey Book Club and one of Hans's many books. And Hans, you might want to get comfortable as there's a lot to say about your bio. You've done a lot of things there, bud. So Hans has written more than 50 books about whiskey in English and Dutch, such as these. Well, there's Field Guide to Whiskey, there's The Road to Craigellachie and The Road to Craigellachie Revisited, The Legend of Lafroig, Still Stories from Kentucky to Kilbeggan. We've got Rum and Reggae. We've got Bourbon and Blues. And we have one I'm reading or have read and we're talking about today. So what he's also done is translated, supplied forwards, chapters, photography to his colleagues' whiskey books. The Whiskey Couple, so that's Hans and his wife Becky, regularly write articles and contribute photographs covering various newspapers, magazines, websites around the globe. He's the patron of the Whiskey Festival in Northern Netherlands, an honorary Scotsman, keeper of the Quake, Kentucky Colonel, which is fun, and so much more. So how are you doing this morning, Hans?
Well, I almost start to blush with all these feathers you present to me.
You deserve a whole bunch more, and I couldn't get to nearly... That might be a third of the accolades, maybe.
Well, thank you, Dolph. Really appreciate it. When you approached me some time ago, and we had a long chat, video chat, I thought I should cooperate because I really appreciate what you do. And when people like your books and they take an effort to read them, to buy them, and even talk about them with the author, I can only be very content with it.
Well, and it's fun because they buy the book and eventually not everyone does a whiskey book club. And often when I buy a book, my friends don't have the book until I've already suggested it to them. So then they read it afterwards. This is a nice way to revisit it kind of with you. And even if they read it 10 years ago, 2010, I think it came out 2010, right? I think it's 2010, 11.
I think the original version, Whisky and Jazz, was a coffee table book. It's larger.
Yeah.
Then I did Bourbon and Blues, and I found out that I wanted to kind of change the narrative of Whiskey and Jazz. So that's when I came up with doing the paperback, and I partly rewrote the book, although in essence it's the same. But I think from a narrative point of view, it's stronger than the original Whiskey and Jazz. That one was 2009.
Okay.
I did Bourbon and Blues 2011, and then in 2012 I decided to rewrite Whiskey and Jazz and came up with Malts and Jazz.
How much did he change in Malts and Jazz? Was it the section in the end, the comparisons or the combinations, or the lead up?
What I found when I was doing Bourbon and Blues, it worked better if I joined them in different chapters.
Okay.
So what I did with Whiskey and Jazz, I split up the whiskey part and the jazz part, and in the end of the book I brought them together. And again, with Bourbon and Blues, I found out it was much better to do them chapter by chapter, the whiskey and the musician. So that's the main change in Malts and Jazz.
Okay.
Yeah. The other change was in Whiskey and Jazz. I didn't pay much attention to the actual production of malt whiskey, and some people asked if I could elaborate on that. So I incorporated that in Malts and Jazz. So I think from the two books, aesthetically and visually, you might prefer Whisky and Jazz, but from a reading point of view, writing point of view, I think Malts and Jazz is better.
Okay. And the larger book, hardcover, the pictures, larger.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm an aesthetic guy. I'm a tactile guy. I like to see things. I like pretty things. So
I'll show you. This is the original one.
that's a big, nice size.
And
Yep.
that's a big book. And of course, we could do much more with. I'll show you. This is a picture of a detail of a spirit safe, where I made the connection visually to between the copper of a brass instrument
Yep.
and the copper used in a spirit safe.
Nice. Okay. Nope. So that's another one to get. Hard to find, you said, but I'll track one down somewhere.
Yeah, you may find them, and if you can wait a little bit, I'll be back in the US around mid-January, and I know there's still some stock available in Charleston. I have to track it down.
Nice.
Then I can arrange a signed copy for you.
That will be perfect. I like that. And the signed copy would be nice because, just because when I write these, I write all over the book. So if you're holding on to like everything in all the margins, it's all filled. So my children, when they get these books at one point in time, it's good because they'll see the inner workings of my mind and what I'm thinking as I'm reading it. But it's not collectible anymore. But this is how I like to have my books. I write all over the books. I use the books well. So hopefully you do too. I'm not sure. Are you the type of person that reads a book and you don't break the binding? You keep it pristine as you read? Or are you like me and you just
I prefer hardcovers.
Okay.
And it's funny. The dust jacket originally was designed to protect the book. But many people take off the dust jacket when they read the book because they don't want to damage the dust jacket.
Which is funny, yes.
But what I do, and I can show you that in Whisky and Jazz, we've been promoting it at the Charleston Jazz Festival. There's big musicians there. One of them was Funky Fred, who used to play with James Brown. And I got him in the book to sign the book for me. So I do this kind of stuff with my books.
Okay.
When I do book signings, I ask people to write something in my book, a comment. So I always keep one pristine. So I have what I call my iron stock from each copy, from each book I've published. I have one pristine copy.
And makes sense. You got your working copy, the pristine that you have behind you, something that you can show off to. That's good. But what I want to say, probably first, because I don't want to miss this, even if we go into a little bit longer, I don't want to forget. It's just saying that I didn't enjoy this book the way I should have enjoyed it. Because what I did is I read it over 3 days, and I think I should have read it over 11. So I think I should have read the information about the source of whiskey and the roots of jazz. I think I should have done that first, like you do. You go through the information, but then each of the 10 days, I think I should have done them bit by bit. So the 15 pages, 20 pages of each one, I think I should have done in a night, another night, another night, just so I could have listened to the jazz and just mulled over, been a bit more contemplative, I think. Because I think this would be a fantastic gift for people that they would get, let's say at Christmas, when they have a little bit of extra time. They can be a little bit more contemplative, like we generally are at this time of year, and just listen to the music or just buy an album or just go onto YouTube or whichever and you click it. But listen to the music and that dram over the period of time. Because I read all of yours so quickly, I had 2 drams in all of the sections that I read instead of doing one by one. So I think that would be the best way to do it. And what I plan on doing when I read that one, taking my time. Although the bourbon's harder for me to get here in Canada than the malts were. So I'll still get them.
If I may comment on that, it's a very nice observation. When Whisky and Jazz was out, I got, after half a year, I got a very long email from 4 Swedish friends who had their own little whiskey club. And apparently they enjoyed the book so much, they decided that every month, one of them should host one of them should cook, one of them should bring a bottle of whiskey, and one of them should bring the vinyl record. So it took them 10 months, almost a year, to work through that book. And they would discuss at length what they thought about the combinations. And that's hardcore, man. That's hardcore.
It's great, but a fun thing to do with your friends too. Yeah, no, that's a good idea as well. I won't do that with mine, with Bourbon and Blues, because I don't want to rely on them to come over, because half the time my friends are not really reliable with very specific dates. They're good with kind of general ones, and with my Alberta Scotch Society, unless I do it, well, maybe months ahead of time we could do it, but might be a good idea with that. So let's go back. Let's go way back. So let's go to the forward to this book. And Dave Broom wrote it, and he references Michael Jackson. I gotta say, it was fun hearing about you and these two other icons, kind of the interplay between you three. And can you relay your link to MJ and to Broom, and maybe a bit of history of how you met each other and how your friendship developed around that?
Well, when I started to become really interested in single malt whiskey, it was in the mid-'80s. And there wasn't much literature available, and I wanted to delve into it, do research. I found one little book from Wallace Milroy called the Original Malt Whiskey Almanac. He published that in 1985. And then later in 87, Michael Jackson came with the book. Now, for most North Americans, Michael Jackson is the hero of the craft beer revolution. But he was also very proficient in writing and tasting whiskey. Single malt whiskey was his passion. So when his Malt Whiskey Companion came out, for me that was the ideal book to compare my own tasting notes with his, and understand a little bit more about how whiskey's made, how all these flavors come into being. So being curious, I tried to get in touch with him, and at first he was a little bit, I wouldn't say standoffish, but he didn't really know who I was, so he was a little bit careful. And then my Dutch publisher, with whom I had published a couple of historical books and a few novels, he said, "Hans, you know a lot about whiskey, and would you help us translate Michael Jackson's books into Dutch?" I thought that's the perfect opening. So then I wrote Michael via his agent a letter. I've been commissioned to translate Michael's work, and I'd like to discuss things with him. And he immediately jumped on that question. And what we quickly find out, although he was 15 years my senior, we have a similar background in publishing and writing. So he kind of thought, well, this old hippie from the Netherlands, he may contribute something to my work. And if you want to get to know someone else, try to translate and understand his work. So we became fast friends, and that was really a friendship that strengthened from each time we'd seen each other. I have an American spouse. Michael had an American girlfriend, so that helped too. And they could get along very well as well. Now, Michael and Dave were already friends. I met Dave at the Spirit of Space Art Festival, and we share, the three of us shared a love for jazz, although Dave was more on the free jazz stuff, that kind of sounds that nobody understands anymore. We were more on the bebop side. Now, there's a little story attached to the Whisky and Jazz book. In 2007, I developed an idea that I wanted to write a series of books around whiskey and the senses. So the first book I did was A Taste of Whiskey, which is still more or less available. That's only a hardcover coffee table book. And I asked Michael to write the foreword for it. Which he did. Sadly, a week after that, it's probably one of the last things he ever wrote, because then he suddenly passed away, which also on Becky's birthday, so it was a real hardship for us. Talking 2007. And my second book, I wanted to write about listening, whiskey and listening. And I had talked with Michael about that. So, Michael, I want to do a book about whiskey and music. And I remember him saying, "Hans, that can only be jazz." So that's somewhere I refer to a seed was sown for that book And that was really where it started. I took him to my pub here, where he did a tasting and a publican, and he loved talking about. I think it was Art Tatum, stride pianist, and they connected like this. And basically, Michael said, "Hans, you do the tasting tonight." I said, "No, you can't get away with that. You've come all over here to my hometown in the Netherlands." So when it was finished, when I was working on Whisky and Jazz, I asked Dave as an honor to Michael to write the foreword, which he, of course, immediately did, and I dedicated that book to Michael. So originally it was an extension on my idea of writing a series about whiskey and the senses, which eventually I did many years later. I completed that series, but then I had this Whisky and Jazz book. I thought, wow, my true love is blues and hard rock. I like jazz very much, but I'm a blues and hard rock guy.
Okay.
So I want to do something with bourbon and blues. That's a nice alliteration. I had become good friends with Jim Rutledge, then master distiller of Four Roses, and Jim is a huge lover of the blues. For the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, he always contracts like the Kentucky Headhunters or whatever. So when I approached him, he said, "I'd love to work with you, Hans." So he wrote the foreword. He was my contributing editor because he had already read Malts and Jazz, and he loved, or Whiskey and Jazz, and he loved it. So ultimately, when Bourbon and Blues was done, Jim came up with the idea, "Hans, we'll do the book launch at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival at Four Roses Distillery." And I'm just a country boy from the Netherlands. I thought, me? Kentucky Bourbon Festival launching my book? That was a dream, real dream. And then later, 2 years later, Jim arranged behind my back. I didn't know that I was going to be made a Kentucky Colonel for that book. So it's all about, it starts with Michael, and he's always in my mind because he was one of my 3 huge mentors in the whiskey industry.
And writing the book at that point, it's cathartic. It's in reverence to him, and you make reference to him several points within the book, so it's very nice. It's humbling at one point, and you're exemplifying what he wants and what he thinks. I was talking to you offline about writing in my books. That's one book I didn't write in. So I've got a beer book of his that was signed, so I didn't write all over that one. So that's still intact. Let's continue. Let's continue with Broom. And here I've got a quote, and you'll soon see that I reference the quotes a lot. So Broom stated, "Malt whiskey is all about conversation, comparing, talking, agreeing, disagreeing, learning. Jazz, likewise, is a musical conversation at its most intimate and almost paradoxically most intense." So you don't mention this in your book yourself, but I can assume that you agree with them. But so I'm hoping you do, because I need you to tell me what you think he means by most intimate and almost paradoxically most intense.
Well, I can't speak for Dave, but I can give my interpretation of it. And of course, he sent me a draft, and he said, "Are you happy with it, Hans? Because we do that for one another." Yeah. And I said, "No, I'm really happy with it." And as far as I understand Dave's work, I've been lucky to translate one of his books too, so I know how he expresses himself. I think what he meant with this is, I played the saxophone for a couple of years when I was doing the book, just to understand the instrument. And I've never been a good saxophone player, but I could handle the instrument and understand some of the theory behind it. Okay. But I think what Dave was trying to say here, if you play jazz by nature, it's improvisational music. You reach deep into yourself, which is very intimate. Okay. And the way you do it is so intense, it bursts out into a beautiful solo. So it's intense as well, but it's intimate because they're all by yourself. You have to, and I refer to that later in the book. It's all about improvisation. It's not from a written score. Has never been so. The basic tune might have been composed, but what the jazz musician does, he or she makes an interpretation of the music, him or herself, And taking a solo, it can take that original tune into an entirely different, very personal approach.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
it does. Still, maybe I want Broom. Maybe we should have brought Broom in too, then had him in the middle and explain, and then kind of out, and bring his head in and explain it out. Back to the books, you said, and I should have picked up on this right away. So rock. So what type of rock? Because why not a tequila and rock maybe book at one point? You could have had 4 at that point, and I'm sure we could have found a 5th one to have a really big box for you.
Vodka and waltzing. Yeah, why not? No, I can only write about something when I have a connection to it.
Okay.
And I don't have any connection to tequila. Although I sometimes down one, but it doesn't really appeal to me as a drink. Rum did. That's why I did rum and reggae. Thanks to Dave, because he was pestering me. He said, Hans, you have to write about rum. I've been doing that with some books and articles. No, you have to do that. And he arranged all kinds of introductions for me in the rum world, for which I'm eternally grateful. But well, my first ever record was a single from the Beatles. I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Okay.
I was 7.
We all know it. Yeah.
Yeah. But my first vinyl album was Led Zeppelin 2. And that started my lifelong love affair with hard rock and blues, because it's heavily drenched in the blues. The first 2 albums of Zeppelin are really blues with what shall we say, some EPO or whatever you want to call it.
Okay. I'm going to have to listen to those again with that in mind, because as when I first listened to those albums and I was younger, it didn't sound like blues to me at that point. And that's probably why I'm holding on to it just as the rock kind of ethos instead of I'm going to try that. I'm going to try it. It's good to revisit things after you've changed your perception in the future. Wouldn't you say? I think it's good. Just like going back to Malts and Jazz, I still think I might do the 1 chapter a night type thing with the different whiskey. And I was saying I only had 2 of the 10 that you had opened, and I have 6 more unopened. I think I might open them up, and that might be my Christmas present to myself.
Why not?
And the whiskey lasts forever. And they're whiskeys that I tried earlier on in my life, so I had a connection to those whiskeys specifically. So it was a very good choice. But we'll talk about that later. I want to get back to the development of the book. So Michael Jackson goes, and you even have the night. So it's November 14th, 2004. He meets Theo Dracht.
Yeah, Theo Dracht. Yeah.
Dracht. Okay. And this book is very different from any other whiskey book I've ever read. Now, did it develop exactly if you envisioned it? Because you had the thoughts of it on November 14th. But was the development of this book more derived from a flow of conversations between you and Michael Jackson, or you and your wife, or did you have the idea right away when you saw the combination?
Becky helps me with a lot of research. In this particular case, she doesn't really like jazz.
Okay.
But if I ask her, can you track down the history of that musician or of that movement, she will help me, and she will give me very valuable information and insights. But in this particular case, Michael and I have been talking about, I was in the middle of starting up a translation for one of his books. I would do another one later, a few years later. And he said, Hans, what are you going to write next? Because he had read my Road to Gregality.
Okay.
I said, well, my plan is to write this series of books on whiskey and the senses. And the first one will be on nosing and tasting.
Yeah.
And then he said, and the second, I said, listening. And then he said the famous words, Hans, if you write about whiskey and music, it can only be jazz. Yeah. Okay. So it all started with bouncing off ideas to one another. And that's what we have a small group of whiskey writers who love to work with one another. Dave, okay. Charlie McLean, you might know him, Martine Nouet, who has her own following in Canada. Myself, there's a couple of more like Ian Buxton, Gavin Smith. We share ideas. If someone approaches me and says, I want to ghostwriter for my autobiography, I say, call Gavin Smith. He's the guy. if you want more of a commercial approach,
Okay.
more copywriting, go to Ian Buxton. Charlie and I do books together, and Dave and I work together. We've even done that was fun. That was really fun. We did at the Speyside Festival. Dave, Charlie, and I did a special tasting. It was called A Tale of Three Monkeys. So we had a picture taken of the three of us, one this and
See
one
no
that.
evil, hear no evil. Yeah, great.
But then Dave needs pictures for one of his books, and Becky and I are the only ones who also do photography. So we arranged that he can use pictures. So there's a very nice working together. These are our friends, but also our nearest colleagues, because we're all independent writers. There's one who doesn't play well with others, and that's Mr. Murray. He has his own life, his own looks. Fine, that's his case, but he doesn't want to work with other whiskey writers.
He must be feeling quite alone right now after everything that happened previously. But
Yeah, well,
I don't know. We'll see if he bounces back, if he learns from the experience. If he doesn't, maybe not. So,
well, the thing is, and that's, I can understand. I may not agree with everything he writes, but I can understand his reaction. He says, I'm an independent journalist. He was a journalist originally, and I decide myself whether I want to write or not, and I don't care. And he always has had a devil may care attitude. But sometimes, if you take that too far, too many people get offended, and then it turns against you. And notwithstanding the fact that you're a good writer, because if you take his early books, and forget about the Whiskey Bible for a minute, but he's written very good books in the past. So, and the Bible is something. I had a conversation with him many years ago when I did the Lefroy book, and he said, Hans, I'm jealous. I would like to do such kind of books. I said, well, Jim, I think you can, but you've written yourself into a dead-end street with your Whiskey Bible. Each and every year you have to do an update, and that'll cost you most of the year. Same with Ingvar Ronde, who's also a good friend. He does the Malt Whiskey Yearbook, and I think it's great. I buy it. He gives it to me.
Me too. I refer to it all the time.
That's to go to. I always take it when I'm traveling. The only whiskey book that I take when I travel. Ingvar is, of course, another one in our little band of friends who work together. Okay. So, no, we do, and we also, that's important, we tell each other what we plan to write about, and then the other one will not touch that subject.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's rare. It's just 4 or 5 people who do that and I'm the only one who's the non-native English writer.
Okay.
So I always tease them. I said, I can do one thing y'all can never do. I can translate your books into Dutch, and you can't do it the other way around.
Yeah. Every one of them. If I love it, I'm translating, or I'll rewrite it. No, I wouldn't say that. So you're a band of whiskey brothers. I like that.
Yeah, that's and nice. A sister, Martina. She's okay, and Becky, of course.
And okay, so that's perfect. I'll leave it at that. I had a couple other questions about kind of the impetus and how everything started, but I'd like to start on jazz a little bit because I need an education essentially. So straight here, let's go with quote right here. Straightforward jazz. So straightforward jazz still inspires musicians everywhere, and pieces written in the late 1940s till the early 1960s remain on repertoires of many contemporary ensembles and quartets. I have a preference for straightforward jazz. So did Michael Jackson. Needless to say, that fondness reflects in the choice of musicians featured in this book. So Hans, you have to help this newbie to jazz, because really, Coltrane was my first jazz album that I bought, and that was 3 or 4 years ago. It was during COVID is when I started getting into it. So help me understand the large categories of jazz, because I'm lost in the names. We've got bebop, swing, free jazz, cool jazz, straightforward jazz, and the one that you said that Broom likes, where it's free jazz.
It's very, yeah. And I always find that interesting. Jazz is a free form of expression in music.
Okay.
So free jazz actually is a pleonasm. But the term is used, and it's often referred to where people like Roland Kirk would play on 3 saxophones at the same time.
Okay.
That took it to a totally different direction, atonal, where I couldn't follow anymore, but apparently Dave enjoyed that, and Michael and I didn't. But going back to the early days, you have to go back to the blues because that's the father of all modern music.
Yep.
Even the classics. There is a beautiful example. Franz Liszt. He once composed a piece called Liebestraum, Love's Dream.
Okay.
That's the first ever blues I encountered. I also wrote a book about classical music, but that's another story. And I thought this is blues, but Liszt never knew it was blues probably, and the term wasn't there yet.
Right.
But it's the same. I guess it's the same feel. Keith Richards, he once said, "There's only one love song, and that's Adam and Eve, and the rest is all derived from it." It's a very interesting.
All right.
But going back to the history of jazz, you have to look at the blues first, where the blues came from. Of course, it came with people from Africa who were enslaved in the U.S. and they didn't have any instruments except their voice, so they could express them with their voice. Then slowly they would use a broomstick and with one iron string and started to improvise on that. And slowly but surely, in Louisiana, it was all a little bit more loose, so they could play the piano, they could start playing in brass bands. So they developed from the old African musical tradition, which also always goes hand in hand with dancing and music making for people originating from Africa. It's the same thing. It's you can't. It's like a Siamese twin. You can't
separate one from the other. Got it. Yeah.
So at first, this musical form was very much in Charleston and New Orleans were the cradles of jazz, different types of jazz. It was very danceable, swing music. Then when it was finally accepted that then African Americans, I always have a problem with how I should use the term now. We have a lot of black friends in Charleston, and they're proud to be black. And if I suddenly start calling them, "Hey, you're of color," he said, "Hans, I'm black. Don't tell me I'm of color." So I apologize if I use the wrong words in these times. I have the greatest respect for every person who expresses him or herself in a way that's not damaging to other people. Having said that, going back, there's first combinations that also blacks and whites were allowed to play together. Miles Davis has made famous quotes about that, but that's a little bit later. The music was very danceable. It was the swing era. You got the big orchestras, and then the Glenn Millers, and there's another one. Sorry, that's my long COVID. I suddenly can't find names, but
I'm like that all the time.
Then the crooners like Frank Sinatra, they came on, and it was all kind of happy music, and there was then a group of angry young men who thought it was horrible. It was too sophisticated, and they wanted to change the world, and that's where the bebop came into being. It's also referred to as straightforward jazz. So the young persons like Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, and later on Miles Davis, and on, they created a new kind of music, new kind of jazz, which was called bebop, and it was much more. There was much more room for personal expressions. They would take an existing song and then soloed around it all in their own way, and then came back to the original theme again. And
now, the people you have in your book, it's with wind instruments especially. It's not piano right now for bebop, right?
Art Tatum on piano is one of the combinations.
Okay.
And there's a vibraphonist, Milt Jackson, is in it with Paul Blair.
Okay.
Which I see behind you.
Right there.
But most of them are they're trumpets players and saxophone players. Yeah.
Okay. And if people want to find out the whole history, get the book, buy this book right there, and you can read it. We're just going over it a bit. I'm going to give you the three principal characteristics of jazz, and just a short little comment on each one, if we could, please, kind sir. Right there. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And we'll talk about the other ones first. So one of the principal characteristics. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I kind of encountered, and that's what happens when you start writing. One idea follows the other, and it's really true that once you're on the right track, the book starts to write itself.
Okay.
And I distinguished 3 characteristics of jazz and 3 of whiskey, and I thought I'll point them out. This is essential for that art form, because making whiskey is also an art. It's a craft, but it's also an art, and it has to have a certain tension that doesn't exist in
right here. Boom.
You gotta listen to it. You gotta learn to understand it. This is very difficult to explain in words. I think it was Buddy Guy who once said, "You can't dig the blues if you haven't got the blues." And
okay,
you gotta get infatuated, not obsessed or whatever, but it has to do something with you, and then you will gradually understand. And again, listen to a jazz piece, and you can't compare it with a normal rock song or even a blues, which is more, I would say, it's more organized.
Because of this reason, maybe.
Yeah, and
the interpreter.
Exactly. That's if you write like the classical composers did. They wrote a whole symphony and was all organized in notes. And of course, the conductor can kind of put his mark on a piece, but the actual piece, there's no room for sudden solos that come into being. And that's the kind with jazz. It happens on stage. For me, jazz is alive. It's alive. Most of my albums I have on jazz are mostly live, apart from Kind of Blue, of course.
I like that better too.
Yeah,
seems more authentic. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but it's more authentic to me, and that's how I buy them. My vinyl.
That's so remarkable. I'm a big Frank Zappa fan, because he did almost everything regarding music, classical music, funk, blues, rock, reggae, very experimental music. He wrote out all his compositions for his musicians to rehearse before they would go on tour.
Yep.
Can you imagine that? Everything was rehearsed to the core, and then they would perform flawlessly on stage, and he would, of course, still use his guitar solos as something that was created. He always said, "I'm an air sculptor. I sculpt waves."
I like that.
And there's one rock guitarist called Steve Vai, and you may know him, who played with Zappa for a couple of years.
Okay.
But what he did, he transcribed a whole set of Zappa's guitar solos. It's amazing. Does that mean that it's less spontaneous? No, I found it almost incredible. There's a famous score of Zappa called The Black Page, which was so difficult. There were so many notes on it. His musicians started to call it, "Oh, that's the Black Page." Too much happening there.
Okay.
So
I've got to listen for that. Black Page.
The Black Page, yeah.
Well, I got to write that down and put that up. Sorry. Continue, please. Well, no, let's do this as well, because we have your 3 principal characteristics of whiskey, and we paired that with these 3 characteristics that we had. So I'm wondering if these 3 would have been the 3 that you chose to kind of match each other. So jazz has to have swing, whiskey has to be made out of grains, and then
yeah.
Oh, no, I'll let you speak to each one.
Well, again, that swing, it's an intangible thing. You really gotta feel it and understand it from the heart, not from the brain. But if it's not there, it's not jazz. You can make a distillate out of virtually everything that has sugars. You can convert sugars into alcohol with the help of yeast. But if it's not made out of grains, you either get brandy or another type of distillate. So when you talk about whiskey, it has to be made out of grains.
Let's go then. Each spirit made at every distillery has a unique flavor and aroma before it is left to mature in oak casks. Compare it with a jazz solo. You can keep it short or stretch it out.
I don't want to go into the technicalities of whiskey distilling, but at a certain moment you have to decide where you make the cut, because the foreshots and the feints, the first and the third part of the distillate, you don't want to use it. So you need the middle cut, and you can play with it. You can keep it short. You can make it longer.
Mhm.
That influences the taste immediately. I'll give you an example. Lafroig, heavily peated whiskey. Most people think that's always has to do with the peat smoke when you dry the barley
Yeah.
in the kiln. But if you extend the middle cut to the back, in the back there are very interesting phenol parts as well that contribute to a smoky flavor. Lafroig is known for taking the middle cut very far to the end, but if you do it too far, then you get stuff in your whiskey that you don't want, and it'll taste terribly.
Yeah.
Also, it's
the wet cardboard, the vegetal
rotten eggs,
Yeah.
the inside of wellies, that kind of thing. You don't want to smell that in a whiskey. It's also during fermentation, you can take a short fermentation, which will deliver more malty flavors, and a longer fermentation, which will give you more floral and fruity flavors.
Mhm.
So I thought I can compare it with the Jazz Solo. It can be very short, can be interesting, it'll be gone quickly, but you can also stretch it. John Coltrane was famous for stretching it sometimes until 30 minutes long. I don't know if it was always the best result, but here's something.
Well, it's nice to see somebody in the moment, and that's, you see that in jazz, I think, in rock as well, with the solos and the drum solos, and but in jazz, you see them in the moment. They're disappearing into their own world, and they're playing. I like that component maybe the best. So here's another one. Left alone and bottled as... No, I'm going to go back here first, because I had a question just came to mind. Did you ever think of pairing so the jazz artists with not just the malts, but maybe the master distiller or the master blender? Because that seems to be more the artistic side. I know it's very technical side as well, but there's an artistic side to that. And I'm wondering if you thought of that component, maybe talking about Jim McEwan with Coltrane or whatever it is, trying to get that, as opposed... I'm trying to think, was there an extra link in there convincing you to go to a distillery because of the distiller or the blender?
Well, it's very nice you say that, and I have a nice anecdote about Jim McEwan, and we can park that for now, but I can come back to that later. When I did the Malts and Jazz book, I was really looking for the character of the whiskey and the character of the individual musician. I didn't go for a master distiller or master blender. And why? They change.
Yeah. Okay.
The distillery doesn't change, and hopefully the character of the whiskey doesn't change either. There might be more expressions, but the character itself, the distillery character will not change. However, when I started writing Bourbon and Blues, I got closer to comparing a certain person with a certain on the distillery with bourbon. If I make an example, I compared Jim Rutledge of Four Roses with Stevie Ray Vaughan. I'm not going to tell you why, because you have to read
the book.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Beam and Coco Taylor, and so it's very nice you asked that question, because it was kind of an evolution from Malts and Jazz to Bourbon and Blues that I thought I can play out this theme in a different way, which also worked well. And from the three in the Drinks and Music trilogy, Bourbon and Blues basically is my the one I had most enjoyment and the favorite one of the three.
All right, nice. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I just threw that out in left field. It just things pop into my mind. I try to say them before I forget. And here's the last one with the ones that you've chosen go together. So left alone and bottled as a single cask malt, they will express the ultimate individual character of a whiskey. And I love that. I like single cask whiskeys. SMWS it's one of my favorite things to actually buy. And a true improvisation on the theme. And jazz is the ultimate improvisational music. I like that. So that's your third combination, what you put together. So let's go back to the book, but and this is the last component I think about the whiskey I wanted to talk about. But you give the reader a considerable amount of information pertaining to the water's influence, and people don't hear that very much anymore. It was more prevalent at one point, and now it's the influence is really just stated on the jackets and the pure springs and things like that. But that's not what we're talking about. So you talk about limestone, calcium, copper, iron. Now I searched for this book right here, Whiskey on the Rocks, for a good long time. Yeah. In the vast depths of my whiskey annals back there's tons of them, and it describes in detail the influence of various minerals on the various distilleries and water sources. And like I told you, I write all over my books, but this one I tried not to. This was at the very beginning of my whiskey kind of life, so I wasn't really reading in it. But you see all the tabs on the outside, but I think is important. I can't really say that I've heard anything recently about water sources outside of bourbon circles in the last few years. Is this still a strong belief of yours over a decade later about the water and the influence and the mineral?
Well, water itself, like I think I wrote that recently. I wrote a new book for the Dutch market, and I spent 8 pages on water alone.
Okay.
I'll take it and I'll go through it quickly, but I need. Sure. I don't have everything in my head.
Okay, no, and the translation at the same time. You're doing many things at once, and
yeah. So that's in the production section. So it's about the base materials and water. I start with the source and the soil.
Okay. Yep.
I'll give you some things here, like water, which is percolated through a relatively soft soil, takes more minerals than water that goes over hard soil. And every soil type has different minerals. And I give some examples here. The granite in part of the Speyside is very hard, doesn't give a lot of minerals. So the water is pure and soft. In the Northern Highlands, like Tain, the hard water is very mineral rich because it goes through sandstone. On Isla, it's on peat ground. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's on peat grounds, and the peat is partly consists of rotted seaweed. Now, if you go to Bushmills in North Island, the water streams over basalt and clay. On the other side of the Atlantic, in Kentucky, bourbon is made from water that's has a lot of calcium in it and is free of iron. And that's because of the filtering through the soil. Then in Japan, Yamazaki has to do with water that goes through gravel and clay filters, and they're all distinctly different from one another, and that has consequences for the production process. And then I make a distinction between processed water and cooling water, because the cooling water doesn't come into contact with the distillate, but it can affect the actual outcome because of the temperature. So there's so many things here. Then you have to realize that in combination with the type of barley, one type of barley takes on more water than the other. Changes in the temperature influence the process of steeping the barley. And the colder the water, the longer it takes the barley to become saturated.
Right. Okay. So there is an interplay, but we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the effects of hard mineral water on a longer or shorter distillation. it really doesn't come into the vernacular very often anymore.
No, and that's why I probably thought, but that was, you invoked that thought now, but I was just writing it, and I thought I have to tell a little bit more about water. One of the important things is the taste of the water is not that important in the process, but the pH level is very important, because if it's not right, you get problems with fermentation. So the water indirectly influences the taste of a whiskey. Well, I can go on and on and on.
Well, you've written a lot of books, so you can do that about a lot of subjects, right? we could talk for days and days and days, which is great with me. That's fine, but you might want to go to bed. It's only it's 10 to 7 in the morning, but it's getting later for you in the afternoon.
No, it's 10 to 3, and I also feel stimulated by this conversation. So that's always good. Yeah.
Nice.
One more thing about water, if you allow me. Charlie McLean and Martine Huet did a very interesting experiment at the Space Art Festival.
Okay.
They had the same single malt, and I can't recall which one it was, and they let people dilute it with different waters.
Okay.
Bottled water from a supermarket, from the municipality, 4 different waters. And it does taste different.
Wow. Okay, I would have loved to have been there, geeking out to that one. That's great. Well, and glasses is another one as well. When you have the different glasses, there's a different flavor. And that was really brought home for me it was a wine festival just recently. And Riddell was doing the presentation, and the same wine in 3 different glasses and where it hits the palate. So the design shows where it's going to hit the palate, front, middle, back, or sides, and it really does an influence on the taste. So something that I thought was a little bit acto, a little bit tart, when it hit the middle of the palate or the front, changed somehow. So there's so many things that you don't really think about, and you hear about them. You really do. So the Glencairns and whichever other glass, the Tuath glasses that you have, what's your favorite glass and why? But until you have them side by side with the exact same spirit, you really can't conceptualize. You hear it, you understand it, but you don't make that connection until you. So I would love to have been there for that. And and now they sometimes sell the water from the source type thing. It's a big gimmick, but it's a fun gimmick. But it's something I'd like to do.
Yeah. Right. But when Becky and I are in the US, the water is chlorinated. Where I live in the Netherlands, it isn't, unless you go to the public swimming pool, but that's for other purposes. In parts of Scotland, it is. 2 weeks ago, Becky and I were in Scotland to taste a whole series of samples for an independent bottler. Okay. And they were cask strength, so we started to dilute them, and I immediately threw it away because it's chlorinated. And I taste that immediately. And in the US, and it's not to sound posh, but I always buy bottled mineral water because I can't drink that chlorinated water anymore.
Okay. Maybe because you didn't grow up with it. So someone like me who's grown up with it, and it just seems natural. I found when I lived in Belgium for the 3 years, the water felt different. So because here it's very hard water. It really is, because I'm in the mountains, very close to the mountains, very hard water, and it feels more fresh. And when I was in Belgium, I would, just like you, I'd buy water all the time. I couldn't drink from the tap. It just didn't taste the same. But I wasn't in the position to judge whiskey or have many whiskeys with that water to see the difference. Really. And cask strength wasn't a really big thing when I was there about 17 years ago. Cask strength, I love cask strength. I love it from the barrel, as pure as possible or unadulterated. But it really wasn't a thing. Our whiskeys were 40, 43. I can't think of very many that was 46. Maybe something like this, the distiller's editions, they would have varied a little bit. But no, that's great. I like that. And let's bring this back to the jazz. Unless I cut you off, was there something else you wanted to say about the water before we continue?
Well, when you said glassware, Jerry Dalton once master distiller at Jim Beam.
Yep.
he once received us for an interview. He told me he's also written a book about Zen. Was a very amazing character. He was a good friend of Booker No when he was still alive. I think when Booker passed away, and he kind of temporarily took on the reins so that Fred could do his ambassadorial work. But Jerry told us at one time he wanted to know the effect of glasses. So he had put 5 different glasses next to one another, all of them filled with Jim Beam, and he invited a lot of the staff to taste the whiskies. And he didn't say that in each glass he had poured the same whiskey. He only wanted to know which whiskey they liked best. So he implied that it might be different. So they all tasted these 5 whiskies, and each one of them chose the same glass.
Okay.
And then he told them, well, actually, it's the same whiskey, but it's a different glass, but you all have a preference for the same glass. I'm a little bit different. Suppose I've been writing all day and I really feel like I have little square eyes, and I go downstairs, I fill a shot glass with Jack Daniel, I do this, and I'm awake again. I like in the summer, my long drinks. So ginger ale with grouse and a couple of cubes of ice. Then I need a highball. I like a tumbler once in a while, not with ice so much, because for me it anesthetizes the palate too much.
Okay.
And if I really start tasting whiskey, and in the evening I will pour one for Becky, and she'll pour one for me. And we try to pour one that we think connects best to the mood of the moment, which is always a nice exercise. And then we try to guess what it is. But then I use the Copita, because this is where I really sit down and contemplate. So the moment and the way I want to drink it, that influences the choice of glass.
Is that tactile because you like it to be thin at that point, as opposed to this? It's thinner in the cup.
I think
more dainty, more. I don't know.
Well,
more elegant.
If I really want to taste, of course, when we do professional sampling tasting, we use the one that the Classic Malts once brought on the market. I find that still the best suitable. But a Glencairn is fine too. But because it's tapered, keeps the aromas a little bit more in it. And if I just want to enjoy a dram, I can use a tumbler as well. Small tumbler of a larger one.
All right. Yeah, I've got, I don't know how many different glasses now. Probably into the 30s, 40s, 50s, just different sizes and things, just to, because they look neat. And I think that's another thing when you surround yourself in whiskey or anything, it could be wine and whichever, but you come across something that's just the minutia difference. It's like, I got to get that. I got to get that. Well, that's me anyways. Let's go back.
You get all the paraphernalia, like these little, I collected USB sticks in the form of whiskey bottles for a while, and then I got some nice ones over there.
It always gives people something to buy us, though. There's never a problem trying to find something for me, for my children or friends. What do you get, Dolph? Well, scotch, whiskey, something around it. Books, if they can find one. People don't tend to buy me whiskey books anymore because they don't know what I have. And you're probably the same thing, I'm guessing.
Yeah, although I have them all cataloged in a spreadsheet, and it was originally more for me. I have a library of maybe 800 books on whiskey, and I've organized them all around here in my study, based on author. Now, then I'm writing, and I need a certain book, and then I don't know the name of the author. I kind of know the title of the book, and then start looking in your library. So that's why I made this spreadsheet, and I key in some keywords, and I say, that's the book. Oh, that's the author. Now I can find it.
No, that's smart. And I've done that with my whiskeys, but not the books. But trying to find something like this, just because it's so thin, and it was, I had 2 other books around it. It took me probably an hour just to find this book. I knew I had it because it's one of the first ones, and it was very important to me. Yeah, so very smart. Good for you. Yeah, catalog, keep it all.
Born out of necessity. Yeah,
makes sense. All right, so let's do this one. New quote. Boop. Now, you introduced the notion of your pairings by stating this. We talked about this already a little bit. So, after careful deliberation and inspiring discussions with a couple jazz friends who knew their B from their bomb, I like that part, I made the following lineup. Then I imagined what whiskeys I would choose to savor whilst listening to their music and ended up with the following list. This part I like because you talked about rock music, and I think some people I've heard online, it's like I'm drinking to this as I'm listening to this, and it's usually rock music at the point. So if people want to know the pairings, they can buy the book. I said that. But what else into the decisions about your combination? You tell them that, do what you have to do. I hope these combinations work well for you. But if not, be creative. Get out there, drink the whiskeys you want or the scotches you want. Find the music that's most appropriate for you. I like that. But I do need to find out if there was any other combinations that you were working on but didn't work out. So what convinced you that you created the perfect combination, or that a combination that you might have considered needed further consideration or didn't make it because it just didn't connect?
Maybe it works best if I give 2 examples.
Okay.
Of 2 of the 10 combinations in the book, and you're in good company with your question. Have you ever met Ewan Gunn? He's global brand ambassador for Diageo single malts.
Oh, quite possible. Well, I was going to say nice suit, but they all have nice suits for Diageo. They're all well dressed guys.
Ewan likes his jazz too, and he once said to me, "Hans, I'm amazed that you can make these combinations. How do you do that?" I said, "Well, I just go sit." And then at that time, I also started to listen to certain pieces and then try to find out, what do I want to drink now? But because this was a book called Whisky and Jazz, I wanted to go from the whiskey to the jazz.
Right.
And I have something about food and whiskey too for later on, but I made similar expositions there. So going back to the book, I was listening to So What from Miles Davis.
Okay.
His whole attitude was, I'll reinvent myself whenever I want. I don't care. I can play with everybody. I don't make any distinction between color, race, or sexual preference or whatever. I'll do what I want to do.
Okay.
And the distillery I found having a similar characteristic was Bruichladdich, because they've been doing their own thing for many, many years, and that was invigorated by the likes of Jim McEwan, who was at that time, he didn't play a role in my choosing this combination, but of course, when he found out, I sent him a copy. He said, yeah, I can understand. But Jim also worked at Bowmore, and he had a legacy there too. So, and that's a different type story. So I thought, so what? Yeah, new direction, because the whole Kind of Blue album was a totally new direction. It was a follow-up of Bebop. Actually, I like Kind of Blue even better than the previous work, but that's
all right.
So then I thought it's about this whiskey, the fiercely independent Hebridean distillers next to this fiercely independent jazz musician who had such a huge influence.
Okay.
So that's how I felt the same. Well, emotions is a little bit heavy, but I thought this is a good match. Now, the other one, and that was something that Michael Jackson actually gave me over his grave. He once told me an anecdote. He had been sitting in Paris with Dexter Gordon.
Okay.
And he said to me, Hans, Dexter liked a smoky martini, and he used Lagavulin for it.
Okay.
So this is such a nugget. I can use it. So I love Dexter Gordon. That's the type of
jazz
saxophone playing I like very much. And then I got more into his playing and noting he can have these extremely long notes. Must have had big lungs. He was a tall guy too. And Lagavulin has an extremely long finish. I thought that's another characteristic why I think they fit well together. But in the end, it's very subjective, very personal how I make these combinations. And then I'll go back to these Swedish friends who every session they send me an email. I said, well, it's a perfect combination. But I think if you set yourself to it, you really listen to the music and you really start tasting, then you experience it more fuller than you just down a glass of whiskey, put a record on the turntable and say, okay, we're drinking whiskey and we're listening to jazz or some other music.
Or anything else. Here's the quote I was trying to think of previously. So the 10 musical recipes represented in this book might not necessarily reflect your taste, but whatever your musical and whiskey preference, I can only recommend trying to blend whiskey and music yourself, preferably in moderation. Good note. And it's rewarding and highly enjoyable. It was. But I believe for the most part, we all want to be guided by somebody. So maybe you were guided by Michael Jackson. I'm being guided by you in this book, which is great. We all want someone we trust and respect to kind of put us in a direction. So thank you for that. And just let the chips fall. Listen to the music, try to make it work. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Who cares? Were there any combinations that you tried to work out, or a whiskey you tried to put in here and just it didn't work out for you, or an artist that you wanted but couldn't really fit?
Yeah, I part of me regrets not having Billie Holiday in the book.
Okay.
Although, and it's something you remarked earlier on in our previous conversation, it's about all these musicians in the book. They're not around anymore, at least not on planet Earth. They're somewhere else.
Yeah,
I believe. But with Billie Holiday, I always distance myself from emotion if I start writing, and with non-fiction, that's easier than with fiction. With fiction, you get into under the skin of the character to get it right. And that maybe I did 3 novels, but that was not my. I found out that I was better in writing non-fiction, which is fine. It was a good exercise. But with Billie Holiday, that whole story and that scene as form of research, the biopic with Diana Ross, who did a stellar performance in the was it Diana Ross who played Billie Holiday in the biopic? Well,
I don't know.
You can look it up online.
Okay. Yes.
But then I thought she was such a tragic personality with such a great voice. I'm almost scared to touch that.
Oh, okay.
So I decided not to put Billie in the book. I did the same with Bourbon and Blues. I couldn't do Janis Joplin for similar reasons.
Oh, okay. And someone you really want to, someone you understood, liked, and you knew the history, but it was just I can see. Okay. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. And I was listening to So What? So with trumpets sounding out the notes that actually sounded like he was saying So What? Now I was happy that I knew this song. And I know the Companion Distillery really well because I love them. Jim McEwan was fantastic. And he was one with Brookletty, one of the very first whiskeys that I started buying from a distillery. Instead of trying to branch out and getting as many distilleries as possible, the first where I kind of focused on it. But I want to ask you this question. Can the lack of one person have such an influence on a distillery, or lack of an artist not having been alive and presenting their music have such an influence on that industry? Because let's go back to Jim McEwan. He trained Adam Harnett. He left Adam Harnett notes, and I'm sure they were really detailed, but their classic laddie changed, and the dark arts have changed quite a bit. Never really been the same since his departure from that distillery. Is there the same thing within the jazz world? Without someone, it would have not went in this direction. Is there pivotal people, or would someone have taken their spot, do you think?
Oh, there are some pivotal people. Definitely Charlie Parker.
Okay.
I think he changed the whole ball game. And I have to think who said that. Miles Davis once was warned for a little white cat on the West Coast who would change. That was Laker. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to look it up. I remember. Okay.
But
And
well, going back to Jim McEwan,
Mhm.
Jim and I have known each other rather well, and
Okay.
that was a side story I promised
Sure.
to tell you. My oldest son, when he was first year at uni, he was always fascinated by what I was doing, and I let him
Okay.
nose whiskeys from an early age, but I didn't want him to drink until he reached a certain age. And in the Netherlands, at 18, you're allowed to drink
Yep.
stronger
In
stuff.
Canada mostly as well. So yeah.
But my son, his name is Sietse, he was really good at discerning tastes and flavors, and he really enjoyed it, not for getting drunk, but he was genuinely interested in the drink.
Palate. Okay.
So he helped me with some tastings, and with his fraternity, I would sponsor some whiskey, and he would do his own tastings there. And the first year at uni, he studied Gaelic languages. Luckily, he didn't continue with that. He did something else, but he wanted to do that, and we gave him
Free reign. Go ahead. Yeah.
to try it. So after a year, he found out that it wasn't the thing for him. He liked the history and the culture, but not this language that nobody understands, nobody speaks. So he said to me, Dad, I want to rethink what I want to do next year. And in the meantime, I would like to work on a distillery to get hands-on experience.
Okay.
Please arrange that. I said, oh, that's not that easy.
Yeah.
You're 18.
My finger.
I said, give me a couple of weeks. I'll put my thinking cap on. So
Okay.
my first thought was, where can he do no harm? Maybe on a little island off the west coast of Scotland.
That's it. Send the island.
I decided I'll give Jim a call. So I said, Jim, I need some help. My boy wants to work in a distillery. He knows a bit of stuff because I trained him a little bit.
Yeah.
I'll pay for the airfare and such. If you give him food and lodgings, that's fine. His real payment is to work on a distillery for a couple of months.
Nice.
Then, without hesitating, Jim said, Hans, send the lad. I will turn him into a man.
Excellent.
So Sietse arrived, and Jim really took him under his wing. He started in the warehouse. He had to move barrels, and he had to learn the different barrels. And Jim took him through the whole process. And in the end, he would serve as a touring guide because he speaks his languages as well, as most Dutch do. So then a year later, I met Jim in Frankfurt. We were in a very posh hotel where we were jointly doing a whiskey food and pairing thing.
Okay.
And then Jim paid me the biggest compliment I could wish for. He said, Hans, you can send him back anytime.
Oh, thank you. Good.
Sietse, he's now 36 and he's brand education manager West Europe for Macallan. So
that's a good job.
Big thank you to Jim. Jim, if you're watching, look, it was a great gesture. Thank you.
And even if he didn't want to take someone under his wing, he knows so many people.
Yeah.
Send him to Bowmore.
Oh, he would have. Yeah, he would have. Well, he could have gone to Springbank for a week, but what he really wanted was to learn and understand. Yeah.
And go through the process. And I know that's a great program. You can do it. And I'd love to do that for a week as well. But I've got distiller friends here, and going and spending a day with them and helping them is not learning about the distillery. You don't know about the life of the distiller or the cooper if you're looking at them, or the filler, and all the individual jobs. I think he did right, or he made the right decision going there and staying with. And how long did he stay? Now, was it just the summer? So 4 months off of
the summer. Yeah, no, not 4 months, 2 months, and then he came back. In 2 months, you can learn a lot. Yeah, and he was willing to learn. He was very eager to absorb all that knowledge from Jim.
No, there's a big difference. I'm a teacher, so when they want to learn and they don't want to learn, there's a massive difference of the intake. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much for that story. I appreciate it. I always like to hear those stories, the personal touches and how other people kind of they influence others. I like that. And when I was reading this book, I've got to say I got quite nostalgic. So mostly the second portion of the book. The first, by reading your descriptions about the artist, I was reminded how I felt reading whiskey books initially when I first started getting into whiskey 20 years ago, whatever. You're reading the books. you get the gist of what was presented, but you knew that you were missing a lot of the nuances. You just knew that things you read and it just flew over, and you weren't getting that minutia. And that's how I felt with jazz itself, because I don't know very much about jazz. So I felt like I did them a little bit too much like a noob. But the second part of it as well, by drinking drams that were some of my very first drams that I ever had. So the classic malts from Diageo, I believe that I was even more moved. I was brought into the feeling. So I'm wondering if you, at the same time, so the reader gets nostalgic for whatever reasons, does the writer get nostalgic while writing? And I'm thinking yes, because of Michael Jackson. But are there other ways that you get nostalgic when writing as well? Or do you get so hyper-focused, it's the job and you get it done?
Well, according to Becky, my wife, I'm extremely focused when I write.
Okay.
Because she can come into the room, I don't even notice her. She will say, "Hans, there's lunch downstairs," and I won't even notice. And then she really has to get me out of my
out of your zone. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm mostly when I write a piece, maybe that's nice to talk about how I do that. I need at least 2 hours on a stretch to do something, whether I'm working on an article, a column, or a book. If it's less than 2 hours, I can't get into the zone, or whatever you want to call it. But I don't allow myself to get emotional, and I think it's a natural process in the way I perceive writing. When I'm actually writing, when I'm editing, which is usually what I do the next day when I read back. You never start editing when you're writing. You write, don't edit, because then you're censoring yourself. So then when I get back and I read something back, when I make a reference to Michael, then I dwindle on my memories with Michael, and I can get not emotional but nostalgic, and then I think it's so sad he's not around anymore, because I know he would have written the manuscript, he would have read the manuscript, give me very good feedback, and he can't give that to me anymore, which I found sad. Luckily, I had for Malts and Jazz Charleston Jazz Museum and jazz musician, and he was really a historian on jazz from the Deep South, and he helped me. Jack McRae, I can show you. I put his picture on the dust jacket of the big book.
Okay,
I'll show you.
Let's take a look at that.
That was Jack McRae, and he helped me.
Okay.
And
nice.
a mutual friend introduced us to each other in Charleston over a good whiskey in a beautiful bar.
Nice. Best places to meet people, I think.
Yeah, I came inside and we sat down and we made our acquaintance. And he looked at me and he said, "So you want to write a book about jazz?" So I said,
yes.
Yes, but I need your help.
Yeah, good.
And then later I said, after an hour, I said, "Are we in business?" Because I also wanted to pay him for his work. He looked at me and said, "Sure." And then he did the same for me with Bourbon and Blues. He also gave me. He's really contributing editor, and sadly he also passed away. But that's just when I read back what I write. But during writing, no. I put Miles Davis in there because for me he's one of the ultimate jazz musicians. But I also saw him playing in the 80s at the North Sea Jazz Festival in the Netherlands. So that's something you never forget.
No, and me it was Dizzy Gillespie. He was my first jazz person I saw, and you always think of the cheeks and the muscles with the cheeks, and just he was fantastic, and what an experience too. And he came. We have symphony, so there's the jazz related symphony part, so not the classical but the jazz, and he came in and did it with our symphony. It was fantastic. So that was the beginning of my life with jazz, was because of him, Dizzy. And you just mentioned death again, and it sounds morbid. It really does. But when I was reading, I was searching for the information about the deaths, because so many of them had addiction problems with alcohol and heroin, which I didn't know that when I read that. It came up the very first, heroin. It's like, wow, I didn't know that was the drug of choice. And I don't know if it was, or maybe just with these guys. But they all had the same fate. They died of liver cancer, kidney failure, bleeding ulcer. It seems so violent to the body, if you know what I mean. So I'm wondering if this was it common with a lot of the jazz legends back then for that to happen, or is it just because of this sample? Because they were all at the height, they were at the pinnacle of their careers and wanted by everyone wanted to play with them. I don't know. It's just
we can get a little philosophical about that. I think with what you see throughout the ages with really geniuses, they all had issues. Go back to Mozart; he had big issues too. He was 36 and he died very young.
Well, we talked about Janis Joplin, yeah.
And I also think if you're at the pinnacle of your career and there comes a moment that you can't really get higher, you start looking for something to get high on.
Okay.
And it might be heroin or it might be something else. I feel lucky. I'm 67 now, turning 68 next year, early next year, and I've worked hard as a whiskey writer for many years, but the recognition luckily came not when I was in my mid 40s, but it came a little bit later when I really enjoyed it and felt like it was an honor bestowed upon me because of a lot of work I did. And I see much younger writers who suddenly are being invited to something, and I think you didn't even earn your spurs yet, and it's not a jalousie de métier or whatever. But then I think you're not even 50, and so what do you expect from life? What is your next goal?
Okay.
And my goal has never been that I wanted to be famous. I wanted to be a writer who could live from his royalties, and that took me more than 25 years, 30 years to come that far. And in between, I have my media production company, but I can finally put that to rest because a couple of years ago, I reached that moment that I could truly say, well, my books sell so well, for which I'm really thankful that I can say if I don't want to write anymore, I can stop. But the paradox here is I can't stop because that's what I do. It's not compulsive, but it's something I really, really like to do. I write every day.
Part of your persona. It's just what you do. You're right, and writers write. It's what they do. Photography must come in there a little bit as well.
Yeah,
or is that more you and Becky?
No, that's funny that you mentioned that. In an earlier career, I was a copywriter, media developer for an advertising company.
Okay.
And I used to work with a photographer there. Very good photographer. And he once gave me a little camera and he said, well, when we're on the job, if you want to take a few pictures too, it's fine. So what I would do, I would take pictures of him on the job so I could show him, here's the making of. And then he looked at it, he said, you have a good eye for composition, you should use that.
Okay.
And I didn't consider myself a professional photographer at all. But then in 1990, was my first trip to Scotland. And I took pictures everywhere, but they were more prompters for the stories I wanted to tell later on. So to this person, it was over there.
Yep.
And then that photographer looked again. He said, Hans, really? I said, don't do a course. You have a natural...
don't let a professor wreck it.
No. Just do what you do. And he said, use natural light. Always use natural light. So I followed up, and my photography became better and better. So good enough to use for my own books. And then companies like Dorling Kindersley, Mitchell Beasley, they started asking if I could supply photography for books of Charlie, Dave, on and on. I said, of course, I have a database of many books. Now, Becky is another story. Becky originally is a marine biologist.
Okay.
But when we met, she was the vice president of a real estate company who did affordable housing. That was her second career. And she kind of fed up with it. So she said, Hans, what now? I said, well, you like whiskey? Yes.
Come on in. We'll do stuff together.
Yeah. So we tried as an experiment, but it worked so well. We've been living together now and married, of course, for 20 years. And Becky has always drawn and painted. So she has a very good eye for detail. Then I gave her a camera about 10, 12 years ago, a digital camera. I said, if I don't feel like taking pictures, do you want to take a few? And it turned out she has, because of her painting probably, also very good eye for composition. And nowadays, well, we use this. I don't use my cameras anymore. And for the type of photography I need, it's more than good. But slowly but surely, Becky has been doing more and more of the photography and I less. So we always publish our images under copyright the whiskey couple because we don't know anymore who took which picture. In the end, we don't mind who has taken the picture.
Nice. I like that. Good. You know what? I'm going to ask you questions. Come to my mind a couple times. I keep forgetting it. So Michael Jackson, we have, I think it was in one of the festivals in the Netherlands, I thought, where the concept of World Whiskey Day was developed for Michael Jackson. Was that? Are you part of that?
No. Well, I'll tell you the whole story.
Okay.
Becky and I founded International Whiskey Day.
Okay.
In 2009 at the Whiskey Festival Northern Netherlands, in remembrance of Michael, and we, together with people from the industry. Not only fellow writers, but also master distillers from all over the world, from Japan to the US and in between. They all decided they would support that initiative. And we made it a fundraiser for the Parkinson's Disease Society because Michael passed away as a consequence of his Parkinson. So we raised a lot of money and it's still available on the web. You can donate if you want. And then Ian Buxton came with the idea, let's invite 6 beer writers and 6 whiskey writers to contribute for free to a book called Beer Hunter Whiskey Chaser. And we're going to sell that book and the proceeds go to the Parkinson's Disease Society. Don't know if you have a copy. I
don't, but that's come up before and I'm going to do it wrong. I'll just keep writing as you say.
I dedicated one of the few fiction stories for the book, a short story, but it's fiction to honor Michael. And at the same time, when we launched International Whiskey Day in Groningen, Ian Buxton launched the book in Edinburgh.
Okay.
And we had, I think it was Hideo Yamaoka who launched International Whiskey Day in Japan. And I'm not sure anymore. Might have been Malt Whiskey Advocate, but not sure who did it in the US.
Okay. All on the same date. Do you remember the date? June 6th is hitting, but I don't think that's it.
And I'll come back to June 6th.
Okay.
No, it was the 27th of March, 2009. And 27th of March is Michael's birthday.
My son's birthday as well. Fantastic. So easy to remember now. Good.
Sadly enough, a couple of years later, a young copycat from Scotland did a rip-off of the whole idea and made something commercial called World Whiskey Day after he had thoroughly investigated and even asked me what International Whiskey Day was.
Okay.
So Becky and I don't want to be associated with World Whiskey Day.
Okay. And is that the other date I mentioned?
It was a commercial rip-off from a charity, and that's what hurt us deeply.
All right, March 27th it is.
Not that other thing.
Not the other one. Okay, forget about that.
Yeah.
March 27th. Well, and I'm paying homage to my son at the same time. That's good. I like it.
I can send you the official certificate. I have it digital. If you can see who all supported it. It's
yes, please. That'd be great to have. I'd love that. Okay, thank you so much. Let's go with the combinations again. So the following represent here. I've got another quote. It's Chet Baker. Okay. So the following represents my biggest whiskey and jazz connection that I had when reading this, and I didn't want to give the combinations away because I wanted people to buy the book. So buy the book, get the combinations, but this is one I'm going to give away. So Chet Baker was one of the most lyrical trumpet players ever. His beautiful melodic phrasing and tender voice merged well with this quiet single malt. So Chet would stumble and fall, but recover in his late years. And you can talk about his stumbling if you want. You don't have to. But by many considered to be his best musically, it took time for him to mature fully. Now, Bunnahabhain, and this is one that I had open, and one of my very favorite drams.
Oh, the 18-year-old.
I love this. I do. Very hard to find now for us, but this is one of my top 5 whiskeys, I think, of all time. So, good. Bunnahabhain has a checkered history, you said, and somewhat resembling a struggle to survive, comparable with Chet Baker's life. Did you have a favorite combination in the book? Because that's mine.
In the whole book, you mean?
Yes. And maybe it's not even this book. It could be this book or the Bourbon and Blues or sorry, I just want to pop them up as I'm saying. Or in the Bourbon and Blues or the Rum and Reggae. Did you have a favorite combination in any of them that you just thought this is the best? I can't get any better than this.
That's asking, do I have a favorite child?
I know going on, but it's a combination. Your favorite whiskey then in comparison? I don't know. For me, that was it because they both worked well for me, and I knew him. So Chet Baker, I knew him, and I didn't know all the artists before you actually mentioned them in the book, so I had to look them up and listen to them. But Chet I knew, and Bunnahabhain I loved. So that was my favorite combination. So thank you very much for that.
Now, if I have to choose one from the Whisky and Jazz book, it would probably be Miles Davis.
Okay.
But from a whiskey perspective, it would be Dexter Gordon with Lagavulin, because that's one of my favorite peated malts. And looking at Bourbon and Blues, I would go for Jim Rutledge with Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Okay.
And that has to do something with, I have, in the Netherlands, I have toured with the Four Roses Bourbon and Blues tour for 8 consecutive years with 2 blues musicians. So
nice.
we went on stage. I would tell stories about the slavery, the prohibition, all the tribulations around whiskey, but also around how the blues came into being. And it was a historical storyline. And then the 2 musicians, they built up from the early Delta blues up to Chicago blues and even beyond. And that interaction between spoken word and music, it was a singer-songwriter and a harmonica player. We always ended with Steve Ray Vaughan and a good Four Roses. But
nice.
That was so nice. Sadly, we had to stop because the harmonica player passed away. So we tried one concert with someone else, but didn't work. And then the guitarist and I said, it's enough. Okay. Yeah.
Now, I keep showing your books back and forth, but so what's on the horizon for you right now? Are you writing one now? Are you redoing an edition or 2 or 3? English, French?
I'm working on 3 projects.
Okay.
2 projects at the moment. One is a book on whiskey and food. I've done that in the past with a chef here in our hometown, and I'm now doing it with a Belgian chef.
Nice.
But that will only be available in Dutch, so I won't elaborate on that.
Okay.
Second thing I'm working on is, and you've shown it, is the Field Guide to Whiskey.
There we go. You've seen that.
It's sold over 200,000 copies now.
Nice.
It was, sorry to blow my own trumpet, it was
you do it.
translated in Dutch, which I did myself. But there's also a Korean and a Hungarian edition, thanks to my New York publisher, who did a tremendous job in promoting the book. We are almost ready with the second revised edition. It's been 5 years on the market now, and it was really time to do a thorough update. So it will appear probably February, March. You will get the second revised edition.
Nice.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have the first, buy the second. There's enough for you to gain on new information, new distilleries, etc., etc.
All right.
The book I'm currently
Look forward to that.
There's one more book, and that will be in English again. Charlie McLean is coined the idea to do a book on blended Scotch, because most of the books are focused on single malt or bourbon, but there's no contemporary classic seminal work on blended Scotch. So he coined the idea, and I said, "Oh, that's a great idea." And then he said, "Hans, I'd like to write it together with you. Are you happy? And are you willing?" Of course, that's wonderful. Charlie is in his early 70s now. I'm in my late 60s, and for us to, in this stage of our writing career, to from scratch make a book with the two of us, we love the idea. So we are only in the early stages. It's a book we need some support from the industry. So we're having talks, and I have good hopes that we may succeed in writing that book.
Well, that's a great idea on two fronts. One, because like actors that get to know each other, like Ocean's 11 and 12, they do movies just because they want to spend some time together with their friends. So that's a great excuse to do that. And the other one, you're very right. There aren't books on. There's individual distilleries, so you can get famous grouse books or what was the last one? A Long Stride. So you have it about
Morgan.
So tons of information out there about individual ones, but not a vast.
We want to make a comprehensive story about blended Scotch. The history, obviously, how blending is done in depth. So we already started to interview master blenders who have their say, the older and newer ones, and the appreciation of blended Scotch and the big brand houses and branding as such. Why branding was so important, especially for blended whiskey. So I don't want to give away the whole story yet, but it will probably be a 300-page book, and we are still discussing the actual size of the book. We don't want to make it too big, but also not too small, because it will be heavily illustrated with beautiful images from the past and the present.
So it's got to be a larger hard copy.
It will be a hardback.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, and table book, something to put there in the living room, just sits there, something to. No, that's a fantastic idea. I'd love to get that. So, let's go to your acknowledgements. Very sorry. So, reading your acknowledgement, I recognize less than 10 of the names. Are the others in your acknowledgements icons in their own rights in their own fields? Because you had quite a few, but I like going through them, and I just didn't recognize the name. I could read a few if you don't have it, but you've got a page, and I underlined the ones. And I told you I was right on the side, but there's tons of Ronald Avernick, Celine Antoine, Carol Bennett, Isabel Branson, Dave Broom, Ian Buxton, Connie Cox, Peter Curry, Mitchell Davis, Liddy Draft, and Theo Draft, Jane Grimley, Marcel Van Gils, and that's a third of them, or a quarter. So it goes on. You're thanking a lot of people, but I'm wondering how many of these are icons, or are they friends that helped individual parts of the development book?
Let me pick out the icons.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you the ones so Dave Broom, Ian Buxton, Michael Jackson, Barbara and Jim McEwan, Mark Renier, like they're big names in there. They come up a lot in the whiskey industry.
Yeah.
But John McDonald, Jamie McKenzie, John McClellan's another one comes up. Ian MacArthur, Jack McCrae. These names, you think you recognize them or know them, because I've read enough books and I always read the acknowledgements, but they don't jump out. So I'm wondering if they're, as you look through, icons or mostly friends.
No, there were some people in the industry who supplied me with an image or an anecdote, and they won't mean anything, even not in the international industry. There's a couple of people from the Netherlands here, but one you forgot was Ronnie Cox, Mr. Glenn Rothes. Glenn Rothes is one of the combinations in the book with John Coltrane. Pete Curry at the time was distillery manager at Springbank. Mitchell Davis, he's a very important person in my life. So my personal icon, he introduced me to my then future wife.
Oh, nice.
He's from Charleston, South Carolina. Let's see further.
And then because of your wife and her being American and your link to the blues, I was trying to think as I was reading them, I was trying to make connections to what I know about bourbon, which is significantly less than what I know about whiskey and, well, whiskey, Scotch and Canadian and international whiskeys other than theirs. So, but okay. So I was just wondering, it's just one of those afterthoughts I wanted to throw in. But I do want to ask, oh, sorry.
No. What I usually do if I sit down with someone, and it can be just a friend or an acquaintance, and we talk about my books, because that happens, and they come up with a phrase which inspires me, and if I remember, I'll put them in the acknowledgements.
Nice.
I also have done 2 books on short stories, like Still Stories from Kentucky to Kilbeggan.
Yep.
And I did that partially with crowdfunding. I just said to the people in Charleston, that people it's available in Dutch and English. The second one is only in Dutch. So if you order a copy and you pre-order a copy and pay immediately, your name will be put in the acknowledgements.
Okay, I'll get my name in there. That's
so
a good way to
what I didn't expect was I got so many pre-orders and payments, I could pay for the whole print run, and then start making money. So I got all these people in the back of the book, send the book to them, and then I would get back an image of them holding the book, and they had encircled their own name in the back. So,
highlight. I'd like that. I would too. So that's not still available, obviously, the crowdfunding, but maybe your second edition.
The second Still Stories is only in Dutch, but the first one is still available in English. On Amazon. So
okay, another book to add to the list. Actually, no, I might already have that. I do have I have about 30 books that have been bought by my wife. She's the only person that really knows how many I have and know, because she takes care of all this. So she keeps getting me books when they come out, and I don't get back to them. I generally try to read the book with the author if I can, and then I'm hyper focused on it for a while. So instead of just reading for 3 days and then putting the book to the side, you think about the author, you think about the questions, and it just I retain the information a lot better when I'm this hyper focused on what I'm going to do. So it's very helpful. I wanted to ask you though, because we're coming to the end of it all. Is there anything we didn't touch that you wanted to touch or talk about in this book, or any books or any upcoming books? Anything that we kind of glossed over too quickly, maybe, or I cut you off, because I do that all the
time? Well, nothing specific comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing, maybe that'll happen in the future. My only experience with your country is when Becky and I were on holiday visiting relatives in Niagara Falls, US side.
Okay.
I can truly say I walked to Canada. Across to with the Maid of the Mist. We did the whole thing.
Okay, good.
That's my only experience with Canada. I have another experience, but that's from a distance. Canada has a wonderful whiskey author in the person of Devin the Kergomo.
And I said hi to him for you when I saw him in Banff 2 weeks ago. Good. So he loved that. He loves being. Well, he's worked with you. He said there were articles. Was it a book or just articles that
he supplied me with some information for the field guide regarding Canadian whiskey, and he checked if I didn't make the obvious mistakes. And of course, we both have been writing for American Whiskey Magazine and for Whiskey Magazine in the UK. I think he stopped for. I don't see his articles anymore. And I only occasionally contribute now.
Okay.
So last thing, I would love to come to parts of Canada and visit a couple of distilleries, because I've never ever seen a Canadian distillery in my life.
Well, you're most welcome here. And if you're in Eastern Canada, that will be Davin's zone. He'll help you out. If you're in Western Canada, I can take you to any distillery over here. That'd be a great couple days. They're not very close. It's not like going to Scotland and them being an hour away. They're generally 2-3 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. Or if we go to the Yukon, that's a considerable drive. But we'll still get you to a lot of distilleries if you want.
If that ever happens, we have family in Seattle, and then I can on the West Coast. I can easily go to Canada, and we have family in upstate New York, which is also for me an ideal entrance into Canada.
Perfect. And British Columbia has about a third of our distilleries in that one province, so you're well situated. It's great.
Good.
Nice.
Well, thank you very much for showing so much interest in my work and going at depth into one particular book. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I hope to be able to do this again with you very soon. And maybe it's Bourbon and Blues, maybe it's a field guide, maybe it's another book coming out. The one that you're doing on the blends sounds fantastic as well. So there's too many books to choose from, but I'm going to ask you, and you'll tell me when you want to do one, or if you want to do one. Maybe this was
too little time. Yeah,
but that's okay. It's better than the alternate, where you have no time, or there's too little books. This is the best of all. Thank you, sir. That's all the time we have today. Whiskey brothers, whiskey sisters, whiskey friends. Been a fantastic morning for me. Thanks to our listeners who joined us today. And there was a couple, and I know it was early, but we'll get most of our people coming in the next couple weeks. And it was good. Thank you for those of you that are going to listen to this in the future. Special thanks to Hans.
Thank you very much.
Maybe I'll have the pleasure of talking to you about Bourbon and Blues soon. Because I do want to do what I said, have it the one drink a night and listen to and try to get the emotion with it as well, not just reading through the whole thing in 3 days. I want to drag it out a bit and have fun with each individual part. I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I can cordially recommend that, because you stretch the pleasure over a longer period of time.
And we all need a little bit of pleasure in our lives. No, we all need a lot of pleasure in our lives, but that's the least we can do for ourselves. And let's say I'll see you all January 13th when we revisit Pip Hill's new Maverick, the second edition of Founder's Tale. And as a final note, I'll just do this. Although this not whiskey this morning, my wife put apple juice to make it look like whiskey because she didn't want me drinking whiskey at 6 o'clock in the morning. Here's the good company. This gentleman right here. Thank you very much. Here's to good whiskey. I'll do this because this isn't whiskey in my glass. So here's to good whiskey. Here's to good conversation. And here's to seeing you all again soon. If you want to see future things, click like, subscribe. And Hans, thank you again and again and again for coming on today. This was fantastic.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.